I'm Billy S, welcome back to the channel. Today we're binding our souls to the Nexus as I rank the bosses of the original Demon Souls for the PS3. This is the first of 3 upcoming Demon Souls videos on my channel, so look forward to my future content on area rankings and legacy mechanics. Compared to Dark Souls and beyond, Demon Souls boss philosophy leaned heavily into the usage of gimmicks. More so than any other Souls game aside from maybe Sekiro, you're encouraged to figure out a boss's weakness and exploit it to win the day. This does mean that for the most part, the bosses of Demon Souls aren't the most replayable bunch, nor are they the most exciting to fight in comparison to some of the legendary bouts in the series, but we had to start from somewhere, right? Like my channel, which over 90% of my viewers aren't subscribed to. Let's rectify that. Now, just to clarify before we start, I will only be ranking bosses with an official boss health bar, so no, the red and blue dragons will not be gracing us with their presence. The red dragon was tedious to kill, even with cheese, and took a good 15 to 20 minutes, and I didn't even decide to kill the blue dragon, sorry Bjor. Old King Doran also gets a quick shout out because that man will knock you flat if you make a single mistake. Getting him down enough health to claim Demon Brand is simple, but if you want that armor set, good luck. Now without further ado, let's rank all 18 bosses of Demon Souls. And be sure to let me know your thoughts in the comments below. At the bottom of our list, we have the boss of 4-1, the Adjudicator. A large, obese, yellow demon with a tongue that can slurp for days, this creature waits for intrepid explorers looking to slay the demons within the Shrine of Storms so it can devour those explorers' body and soul. Coming at the end of one of the more iconic levels of the game, it's a shame then that the boss doesn't live up to expectations, being a gimmick fight. The only way to damage the Adjudicator is to hit the golden bird atop its head. You can snipe it with arrows or magic for an easy kill, and an achievement in the remake, but for melee builds, just hop down, whack the boss's wound a few times, and it'll fall over to let you attack it. It's a shame that this gimmick of knocking the boss down to expose its weak point was already used far better with the Tower Knight boss earlier in the game, so it begs the question, why redo the gimmick with a less interesting boss in an extremely cramped arena? I appreciate the effort to make unique boss encounters, but sometimes a good old-fashioned duel is better than whatever this fight was. I do love his goofy design though, and I will not forgive the remake for taking away his beautiful yellow skin or the goofiness in his boss music. For many new players, the Dragon God will be the first archdemon they encounter, and will really set the tone of those fights for the rest of the playthrough. But they're all gimmicks. It's a real shame that after beating Flame Lurker, you're greeted with stealth mechanics. If his eyes are yellow, you can move. If they turn red, hide or die. Breaking the rubble to progress can feel painfully slow, and oftentimes you feel like you shouldn't have died when you did. The Dragon God is ultimately taken down by 2 ballistas set up on either side of the arena, and a little bonk on its chin. Be sure to use the Hands of God in the remake when you chin bonk him for a secret trophy. Make one mistake though, and you're falcon punched back to the Archstone to do the fight from the very beginning. With such a grandiose arena, they couldn't think of something a bit more exciting to end the Stonefang Tunnel Archstone with? I would have even taken a ceaseless discharge style battle if it meant getting to dodge the DG's punches. This fight hurts even more though if you beat the tutorial level at the start of the game, as if you are able to best that opening challenge, your reward is a special cutscene and a punch to the face by a different Dragon God. So you'd hope by the time you face the creature again you could avoid that fate, showing growth. But no, you still have to crawl around like a little ant and you're just as fragile to punches as you were at the game's beginning. Missed potential. Alright, hot take alert here. I really don't enjoy the online mechanics of the Souls games. I would much rather treat these titles as single-player PvE experiences. I don't think online play is bad or anything, I'm happy for everyone that enjoys it, it's just not something for me beyond maybe the messaging system? Invasions, cooperation, Which is to say, I'm not the biggest fan of player-controlled bosses, because they are only fun for as long as a game's online server remains active. I can't judge the PS5 Old Monk fight, which you might enjoy given the community is active there, but fighting against the PS3 Old Monk's AI, it's like seeing a toddler try to walk for the first time. I do have to give props for scope, as trying to create a PvP boss scenario back in their first Souls game was ballsy, but with the boss's extremely limited health pool and easy to dodge magic attacks, the fight posed no threat to me on my strength melee build run, and didn't pose a threat to me on my original dex build run either. Some positives: I love the design of both the arena and the monk himself, seated atop his decrepit throne of chairs, taken over by the iconic yellow robes that would then become the Xanthus crown, in a gorgeous stained glass church-like building. It's like meeting an evil pope. But then I remember the boss run back past the 2 Red Phantom Mind Flayers, and the rage returns. It's a shame Latria ends with such a whimper when the potential to go full Eldritch for the Archdemon was sitting right there. If Elden Ring has taught me anything, it's that bosses who can regenerate health are a divisive experience. Lucky for us, the Leechmonger from Demon's Souls would probably die to a single paper cut as long as said paper was on fire. The 5-1 boss suffers from a difficulty imbalance, where fighting it without fire can actually be tedious due to its health regeneration, especially if you're not like me and aren't running around with a crushing +5 claymore with over 40 strength. Whereas fighting it with turpentine, firebombs, or pyromancy just melts this thing so quickly that it's not even worth calling a boss. Demon's Souls struggles more than any other Souls game when it comes to difficulty scaling because enemies and a majority of the bosses have a built-in weakness that, once you know it, makes them a cakewalk. There's also the element of game progression, as the popular progress paths leave the Valley of Defilement as the last Archstone each time. Whether you want to complete each of the Archstones before moving on to the next, or you want to beat all the -1 levels and then the -2 levels, Valley of Defilement will most likely be the last place you visit, unless you actively choose to start with 5-1, in which case more power to you. Either way, Leechmonger is the unlucky boss that falls at the tail end of this progression path, and thus it will always get the short end of the stick. Players will likely have already upgraded a ton of their gear and be over-leveled. There's even a merchant close by who sells you fire buff items for your weapon. My only saving grace for Leechmonger is that at least once you're up close and personal with it, you can just pretend it's a regular enemy and fight it that way. But unlike every other creator on the platform, I can't bear to put Leechmonger at the bottom of my list. Maybe I like the design, or I find the convoluted arena charming, I really don't know. Leechmonger apologists, where are you at? As the great Nelly Furtado once said in the ancient annals of 2006, oh, that's my favorite joke. The man-eaters of Demon's Souls certainly live up to that expectation, but not in a way that I found enjoyable, I'm afraid. These guys are the precursor to the gargoyle gank fights that we're all used to at this point, but the man-eaters are special. Their AI is, for lack of a better term, f***ing garbage. Just like the gargoyle enemies of Upper Latria, they can't decide whether they want to fight you, back away, or fly around aimlessly. Sometimes they'll just blue screen in place and let you get a few free hits, or get caught in extremely punishable attack loops. And yet on the other hand, enter this fight with subpar damage, and you may be looking at a frustrating pair of beasts aiming to make your life a living hell. The arena is thin and narrow, with gravity being one of your greatest foes. All the while, you're avoiding sound wave blasts, fist slams, and magic attacks from their tails. I only died to these guys once on this playthrough, and admittedly my death was due to me getting cocky, but the unpredictability of this boss's speed and movement makes it very hard to read. All the makings of a good fighter here, I was able to kill the first man-eater before the second even made it to me on my successful run, which is a blessing. But the sheer jankiness of their AI makes having a serious fight with the man-eaters unenjoyable. You'll laugh the first time you watch them fly off into the void for 15 minutes, but on repeat playthroughs you're just thinking, come over here so I can smack you. King Alant, hidden deep below the Nexus, slumbering in the stomach of the Old One like the vor fetishist he is the easiest fight in the entire game. An absolute joke of a boss who gets tossed around like a ragdoll and discarded immediately following his death. The king, who has been feared as this grand evil who set his land to ruin, is a simple blob. It's comical, yet fitting. We've seen the horrors his actions have wrought on Boletaria and the wider world. We watched his son Ostrava die, attempting to find out the truth of his father's actions. Countless lives are on his hands. And yet he beckons you inside the Old One and is then surprised when you kill him? He can do a brief bit of damage if you're not careful, but eat some grass and you'll be fine. What was he expecting? For you to be like, sure, eat me, king? He ranks above the bosses I've already mentioned purely because this fight makes complete sense with his lore, and is a nice contrast to his demonic doppelganger, but make no mistake, on a purely mechanical level, the true king would be sitting at the bottom of this list. See where all that power got you, Alant? Nowhere except the end of my blade, bitch. The first boss you're required to slay to progress the game. You may know Phalanx from its Dark Souls 1 incarnation in the painted world of Ariamis, but in its boss form in 1-1 of Demon Souls, it's a fitting challenge for would-be demon slayers. If you've been paying attention throughout the level, you'll notice you've been given a hefty amount of firebombs from the enemies en route to opening Boletaria's gates. So if you put 2 and 2 together, you can make Phalanx a much easier experience by starting World War III and raining Molotovs from the heavens. Without using fire, I think Phalanx is a surprisingly difficult first fight that requires careful positioning and patience. It's truly fitting that the first obligatory boss in FromSoft's Soulsborne series is a f***ing gank. It always feels like the projectiles being launched by the shielded enemies hit the player with astounding accuracy, and this fight really preaches finding the right openings to wail on the core to win the day. I do love that the actual demon doesn't have a means to defend itself, becoming a sitting duck once its servants have been slain. In my first playthrough, I actually did just that, killing all the extra enemies, and it's truly satisfying when you're left with just this bulbous core that runs away, unable to stop you from taking it down. I think I might be a sociopath. I am forever grateful that the amount of spiders in FromSoft games is actually relatively small, as I have pretty severe arachnophobia, so praise be, the armored spider doesn't trigger it. Let's go! Small victories! This fight is like a game of red light, green light, where you're having to dodge and avoid projectiles to get up close and personal with the spider itself. It can be brutal if you get caught by the spider's webbing attacks, as it slows your player to a crawl and makes you a sitting duck for the soon-to-be-launched fireball with your name on it. I'm not a fan of mechanics that restrict player movement, especially in an arena like this where half the fight is moving up the corridor to even reach the boss. I had a fire-resistant shield in this playthrough though that made this fight a little easier, but I'll admit I had some trouble learning this boss's attack patterns. That physical swipe was really hard to predict for some reason, and eventually you will be forced back to the start of the arena when the spider uses its room-wide fire attack. Or you can be like me and somehow avoid the hitbox altogether, allowing me to stay right next to the spider to continue the hurt. Genuinely didn't know this was possible and felt super satisfying to pull off. There are also a series of cheese methods to make this fight easier, but I don't like to actively cheese bosses with unintended strategies. We're starting to hit the fights I really enjoy now, so let's move on to my top 10, starting with the first official boss of the Souls series. The Vanguard Demon deserves its flowers for being the archetype for bosses like the Asylum and Stray Demons, the Demon Fire Sage, and most recently the Erdtree avatars in Elden Ring. Who would have guessed this little man would go on to create a family tree that's still going strong to this day? The boss itself is your classic FromSoft fare, where you have to smack that booty and hug those cheeks to win the day. But unlike the Asylum Demon from Dark Souls 1, I actually think Vanguard is a harder boss. His cleaver swings are faster than your average bulky demon, and he can very easily catch you off guard with just how wide some of his swings are. His footsteps can easily stagger you if you're too close, and fighting him in the tutorial can be rough if he chooses to back up against a wall in the arena, as you won't have a viable way of getting behind him. He has a surprising amount of reach with his forward slam as well, meaning you really have to time your heals. I found running around his left side was my best bet for avoiding attacks, and 90% of the time I can take this demon down. Except for this specific playthrough, where he knocked my ass flat right at the end of the fight. I got my revenge though. His 4-1 appearance is pretty much the same, you just have to deal with the storm rays shooting projectiles at you while you battle him, and he does extremely high damage there. I just can't put this fight any higher because I prefer the more varied mechanics on offer in the fights above.
Dirty, dirty, dirty.
I went back and forth on my ranking for the dirty Colossus of 5-2, as I had a very easy time with this boss in both my first playthrough and this recorded playthrough I did for video footage. And yet despite that, I actually enjoyed this fight. Perhaps because it's one of the few bosses in Demon's Souls that feels like a simple duel between two creatures, or maybe because I was just grateful for the ease after getting through the Swamp of Sorrow, but I just can't bring myself to dislike this guy. He has some good swings you can dodge, a few plague-ridden projectiles that keep you on your toes, and can even set up fly swarms that, if you pass through, will begin gnawing at your health unless you can burn them away. It reminds me a bit of Nishandra's Curse Orbs in Dark Souls 2, and I'm surprised more bosses don't play around with this type of mechanic. Ultimately, the Colossus can be burned with fire just like the Leechmonger, but the arena and the fight being more straightforward allows me to appreciate the boss more. An easy fight to be sure, but a welcome one, which I'm sure will be an incredibly unpopular opinion. The precursor to Pinwheel and the Crystal Sage, before those magic multipliers, was the OG, the Fool's Idol. This creation of the old monk was fashioned in the image of the Queen of Latria, to give worshippers a deity to pray to for salvation. Though, as we know, Latria is a place beyond that point. Her battle is a simple puzzle, as after damaging her enough, she'll warp away and summon clones of herself throughout the arena. Weaving through the church pews and around stone pillars, you have to find the true idol or face her wrath. There are two ways to tell the real from the fakes though. The first is the lock-on system. If you lock onto a fake idol, their health bar will show, while if you lock onto the fool's idol, no health bar will appear. But the far easier tell is the magic they use. The fake idols will fire small soul attacks, while the real idol will blast you with a far larger magic projectile. Be aware in the remake you can get a trophy for killing the boss without harming any clones. You also have to avoid the traps on the floor that you can only see while she's teleporting. Step on one of these invisible sigils and you'll be frozen in place, no doubt to be blasted to Kingdom Come by magic. While I'm still not a fan of movement restrictions, I find this to be a far more enjoyable mechanic to deal with over the armored spider's webbing because you get the opportunity to see where the traps are placed this time. It sucks for people with awful memory and it isn't for everyone, but it is my cup of tea. What's not my cup of tea is this bitch on the balcony whose sole purpose is to revive the boss endlessly unless you kill him prior to entering the fight. That is so fucked up. I know, if you wear the thief's ring, the old hero becomes an absolute joke. But a majority of players won't know about that strategy, so I wanted to discuss this boss on his merits without cheese. The boss of 4-2, the old hero, is unique in the Soulsborne series as a blind boss who relies on sound to feel out the location of his prey. You can get a few hits in while he's searching around for you, but once enraged, the hero's combos are devastating and you'll find yourself needing to heal more often than not to stay alive. If you're a projectile-based build or a magic user, I suspect you'll have a much easier time as you can simply create distance between you and the boss before using your attacks. But as a melee build, I really enjoyed the cat and mouse game where you have to wait for him to start searching and then get a quick slash or two to his legs. His design is also really cool. The lushly decorated clothing and that bright yellow glow gives this hero the otherworldly presence, and for me it makes him way more intimidating. I am grateful that this fight is easy once you figure out his gimmick though, because you couldn't pay me to willingly do the boss run back through 4-2. Fuck that. Just don't break any pots in the arena and you'll be fine. Though a part of me wonders what a fight against an unblinded old hero would have been like. Ha 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 ha. Just missing out on my top 5. We have another series staple, the Tower Knight, the inspiration for the Iron Golem of Dark Souls 1, the one reborn from Bloodborne, and pretty much any enemy that requires you to cut their ankles off to stagger them. When you think of Demon Souls, I guarantee a majority of Souls fans will think of the Tower Knight introductory cutscene. Tall, imposing, and absolutely epic, this battle is a true duel after being treated to phalanx in 1-1. Though of course, in true Souls fashion, it can't be that easy. Archers litter the field, all ready to snipe you unless you run up and slay them first. You can get a remake trophy for killing Tower Knight without slaying the archers, but there's no such thing in the PS3 original, so I was more than happy to even the playing field. I like that the Tower Knight can't really hit you with his magic attacks while you're slaying the extra archers, so you can afford to take your time, but once you hop back down and fight the boss proper, it's less like dueling a fellow knight, and more like avoiding a force of nature. Every attack from the Tower Knight is effectively an AoE, from his shield slam to the way his entire body becomes a hitbox when he jumps. Your goal is to cut those tendons and wail at the head while dodging through his legs to stay behind him, and that will eventually win you the day. Hilariously, when you do stagger the knight, it is possible to be knocked over if you're standing in the wrong place when he falls. And yes, I made that mistake twice. Don't judge me, please. Maiden Astraea and her trusted knight Garl Vinland are a unique boss encounter, as Astraea isn't a demon in the conventional sense. As far as the archdemons go, she's just a human who chose to become a demon for the sake of the people in the Valley of Defilement. She wanted to ease their suffering after seeing her god abandon these people to their squalor. Lore-wise, she's the equivalent of a lobotomy for the inhabitants of the valley, taking away their suffering as they willingly gift her their souls and the souls of anybody who strays inside. This is the only fight in the game that makes you think about what you're doing and whether you're on the correct path. To that end, Astraea won't fight you. She sends Garl Vinland, her loyal knight, to defend her instead. And if you take the normal route, you'll need to slay him to progress. His AI is sadly quite exploitable, he's a strength boy through and through, and I decided to show him who the true Pancake King was, flattening him into the ground. He can also get baited into using his attacks underneath this cliff, which will stop his attack mid-animation, giving you extra hits. But you can also choose to forsake Garl Vinland, and snipe Astraea from afar, which will grant you a trophy in the remake, and is a nice alternative for players who just don't have the damage or patience to handle her bodyguard, you cowards. Still, I think it's fitting that when you slay Garl and approach her, she doesn't fight, but instead ends it on her own terms. You are the boss in their story. You are the demon coming to slay and take their souls from their perspective. If that doesn't give you pause to think, I don't know what will. Also, god tier music. Shunsuke Kida was not appreciated enough for his work on the original Demon Souls soundtrack, and it deserves so much praise. He brings so much atmosphere to every single boss fight, it's fantastic. The progenitor of every single night boss in the Soulsborne series, the Penetrator was the first taste players got of a true one-on-one duel for the ages. Seeing this knight spear through a fat official was a fantastic way to introduce him to the player, showing that you're up against someone leagues above the enemies you've just fought through. In reality, as someone who's played every Souls game, the Penetrator wasn't a terribly hard fight. He has a few sword swing combos that make me think a little bit of Lady Maria, and his Penetrator attack that spears you on his sword is also reminiscent of the Pursuer from Dark Souls 2. After all the gimmicks, it's nice to just have some endgame bosses that are straight up tests of skill. His design is also absolutely sick, and I love that the remake actually allowed players to finally wear his armor set, something Demon Souls fans have waited for a long time. You can summon Bior of the Twin Fangs to fight alongside you in this fight if you've already saved him from his jail cell, which will grant you a remake achievement if he survives, but I'd rather fight the Penetrator solo, as having another target for the boss trivializes the fight due to the limited AI. What else can I add? An awesome clash of swords that whets your appetite for the battle awaiting you at the end of 1-4. Opening up my top 3, we have the first boss to achieve infamy for its difficulty in the series. Flame Lurker was Demon Souls' equivalent of Ornstein and Smo, being a surprisingly tough and aggressive boss to face in the game's second Archstone. No doubt because some players wanted to beat Stonefang Tunnel before moving on to Latria, Shrine of Storms, or the Valley, that meant having to overcome the Flame Lurker early in the game, and if you hadn't had any Souls experience, I can see why this boss would cause frustration. In my case, I was able to take down Flame Lurker on my first attempt, but not without difficulty. Carefully managing my health while avoiding the lava pools, and attempting to learn the boss's tells was surprisingly difficult. His explosive punches always caught me off guard, and I still don't know the best way to deal with them, as it's not always clear where your safe spots are when handling his attacks. Combine that with his jumps and lunges that leave you needing to make split-second decisions on whether to attack or escape, and you have a boss that keeps you on your toes from beginning to end. Easily the best boss fight I had in the game from a pure difficulty perspective, being the only fight that had me genuinely worried I would lose. But for me, 2 fights stand above it. Our runner-up for best boss in Demon Souls is the Storm King. Over the course of the series, we've had multiple bosses who focus on providing the player with a pure spectacle. Yorm the Giant, the Divine Dragon, and most recently Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy. But this trend started with the gigantic Manta Ray in the sky. Already, I'm biased towards this fight due to the aesthetic alone, the stormy windswept skies, the muted greens and stormy greys and blues. That's my color scheme in real life in a nutshell. You come out on this stormy outcrop and you're greeted by these rays firing at you, but you can't damage them. Then you see a note on the ground, and you notice a glint in the distance. Nothing quite prepares you for seeing the Storm Ruler for the first time and pulling it from the ground like the sword in the stone. What is this, you might think? Should I try it? So you equip it, press the heavy attack button, and BAM! You rend the heavens asunder and use the biting slices of wind to tear your way through the storm rays to get the attention of the king himself. His projectiles are quite tough to manage, and left me almost dead a couple of times, but limping through the pain, healing up, and dealing the coup de grace to this ancient god, it never gets old. If you're looking for mechanical depth, I understand ranking the Storm King much lower on the list, but if you're like me and you love the spectacle, the aesthetic, and the music both in the original and the remake, the Storm King just hits all of my niches to create a fight that I adore and look forward to every time I play. Who else could stand at the pinnacle of Demon Souls than old King Allant himself? From the moment you step into the arena and the haunting, macabre organ theme starts up, and he turns to face you sword in hand, you know you're in for one hell of a fight. And the old king does not disappoint. Allant has the most varied moveset of all the bosses in the game, with vertical and horizontal wind slashes, multiple dash attacks that close distance, heavy overhead sword swings, quick slashes where he jumps back to avoid damage. He's got an AoE attack that I didn't see during my fight with him that you can stagger him out of, but most infamously, his grab attack can drain your soul level. I got caught by this once, and that was more than enough for me to keep on my toes. If you've played enough Souls games and you've leveled up after each boss encounter, you're more than equipped to handle old King Allant, and I'd say I find Flame Lurker harder overall, but I think the quality of the old king is to a higher standard. All of his moves feel tested and well telegraphed, and he walks towards you like a fucking JoJo character. Those ghostly wind wings must be his stand, it all makes sense now. Honestly, and perhaps this is a weird comparison, but Demon Souls feels like a lost Castlevania game, and Old King Allant feels like if Dracula wore white. An absolutely stellar fight that ends a surprisingly strong first effort from FromSoft's Souls series, and a great experience to have under my belt. But what about you guys? Which bosses in Demon Souls do you enjoy the most? Be it for their battle, their lore, their music, anything. Leave your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you for watching. My socials are on screen now, so feel free to follow where you feel comfortable. A massive shout out to my Patreons over on Patreon, you guys are awesome, and the reason I can continue making content like this. And if you're interested in more Soulsborne videos, I have done countdowns on Dark Souls on the channel. I'll see you guys next time, where I rank the Demon Souls Archstone areas. Adios.